Hey, Danny.
Hey, Professor.
How's it going?
Uh, Pretty good. How are you?
Good, good. Yeah, doing well.
Woke up kind of early for the reveal for Smash.
Oh, yeah. I saw that when I woke up today. What do you
Yeah.
think?
I remember talking to you back last year when we were talking about how Disney was being stingy.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the rumors were fake and they threw us off.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that was crazy.
Yeah, a lot of JRPG love. Like a lot of the recent characters have been JRPG
Yeah, that's what
characters.
I've noticed. Yeah. I was kind of weirded out that a lot of people were more excited for Minecraft Steve than Sephiroth. That's what I found out. I was like, oh, I didn't realize that.
I think Minecraft is more popular with little kids. That's why.
Yeah, yeah.
That's my impression.
Oh, Professor, I just have a conceptual question for heat transfer.
Sure.
I remember watching your videos. You said that counterflow is better for gradual consistency of heat transfer, right? Throughout the piping.
Yep.
I had a specific question. I know that it's called we're using counterflow. Does the like let's say the inner pipe is trying to warm up the water on the outer pipe.
Yep.
Does both fluids need to be moving, or can one of them just be stagnant?
I mean, it's always better if they're moving, and so the more movement that you have, the more effective the heat transfer is going to be. I mean, technically, you can have a heat exchanger with none of the flows moving, so you can have both fluids be still. It's just not going to be as effective. It's just when you add more velocity in there, that's going to make it more effective generally.
Right. Okay, thank you.
hmm
Just what are your thoughts on the final review?
Uh, I think it's honestly, I haven't really been playing Smash recently, um, and so I'm pretty indifferent to it, I guess. I
Oh,
feel like most characters that I would want in Smash, except for like some really niche characters that I would like that I know would have no chance at all getting into Smash,
right.
are everyone's in there that I would want already. I think I'm more sad that this is it, and Sakurai is going to retire after this, and
Yeah, that's what it seems like.
yeah. I think that's what I'm more. That's my most predominant emotion, more so than Sora
Same.
himself. Yeah.
Right.
How about you? What are your thoughts?
I was still holding out for like Crash Bandicoot or something,
Oh,
but the people got what they wanted.
yeah.
Well, everyone kept saying Master Chief. I'm like, why would he be there?
Oh, I think it's not outside the realm of possibility, but yeah, he's not a Nintendo property at all. He's never been on Nintendo property.
Right. I thought it was funny how they had to censor out Mickey Mouse and everything.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, if there's any company, it's funny because I feel like Disney is very stingy with their IPs, which
Yeah.
I guess as they should be. But I feel like Nintendo is very close second of being very
Yeah, yeah,
protective
yeah.
with their
I know what
IPs.
you mean. Yeah.
It's two terrible companies doing the same thing.
Yeah. Oh, Professor, do you know if you're teaching any elective class next semester?
Uh, I don't know at this point. We haven't talked about the schedule for next semester at all. The last 2 years I've taught computational heat transfer, EGME 417. And so just my presumption is that I would teach it again. Um, Normally I also teach the finite element class in spring, but I'm teaching that this semester instead.
Right.
And so I don't know if they'd offer it twice in the same year. But if that one's offered, I think I'm most likely to teach that one because I've taught it 4 times in a row now.
Oh,
Besides that, I'm not sure. Is the schedule for next semester up already?
oh no, no. I was just curious.
Oh, okay.
Planning my schedule.
Okay, yeah, those two I say are probably most likely that I could think of, unless it's another new class.
Right. So it'd be better to email you around that time of classes then.
We probably honestly won't know. We probably honestly won't get our teaching assignments until like December, maybe right until the semester ends, because
Yeah.
our department's a little bit slow on that. But I'd say 417 is pretty likely. Yeah, I would say that's the most likely one. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Mhm. All right, it's 1 o'clock, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing today? Good, thumbs up, good, good.
Doing all right. How about you?
I'm good. Good, yeah, I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. All right, so last time we met up, we had our midterm, and so regarding your midterms, I haven't started grading them yet, and so I'm planning to start grading them probably sometime tomorrow, and I'll have them fully graded by Thursday. And so Thursday, we'll talk about the midterm, we'll talk about averages and everything like that. And the nice thing about the taking exams on Canvas is that I can be a little bit more detailed in my feedback, just because it's a lot faster to type stuff than to write stuff, and you'll have the feedback basically right away. Yeah. Question: do I curve if necessary? So I don't curve individual exams or individual assignments, but at the end of the class, I do grade adjustment. And so what I do with that is that basically after all the grades are in, for all the exams and the final projects, I'll take a look at the overall class average. And if that overall class average is less than a 79%, then I'll add points to everyone's grades until that average is up there. And so let's say that the class average ends up being like 76%. And so then I'll add 3 percentage points to everyone's grade, and then I'll assign the final letter grade based on that. Yeah. So I don't do it until the very end, because it's especially for this class, the exam scores tend to be a little bit lower than the final project score. So the final project is a big part of your grade, and that tends to score a little bit higher. And so after the final project, things tend to get bumped up a little bit. Yeah. Good. Okay. And so the plan for today is we're going to finish talking about benefit cost ratio. Okay. And so I have one little twist on that, and basically one more example that I want to do with that for you guys. Okay. And then we're going to start moving on to talk about taxes. Okay. And so after, this kind of marks a transition in this class where, up to this point, we've been learning economic analysis techniques. And then from here, we're going to start to add some layers of complexity to, the techniques that we already know. And so the first layer is going to be taxes. Okay. All right. So I think that's it for the announcements. I'm working on your next homework assignment. And so homework 4 should hopefully be up by today. So I wanted to finish that first and get that to you all. So you can start working on it, whenever you want. And it's going to cover, it's going to be a fairly lengthy homework assignment, because it's going to cover rate of return, benefit cost ratio, and a little bit on taxes. And so I want to make sure that I give you all a good amount of time to work on it. So after I post it, it'll probably be due in about little bit over 2 weeks. Okay. Okay. So any other questions before we get started today? Okay, all right, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, and so last time, a week ago, last Tuesday, we left off, we were talking about benefit cost ratio. Right? Right. And so the whole idea with benefit cost ratio was that this is kind of another economic analysis technique. So right in the same vein as like present worth analysis, right in the same vein as annual cash flow analysis, and then the most recent one that we learned, rate of return. And so benefit cost ratio is in the same vein, although it's used a little bit less often. Okay. And so what we basically, the way that we basically define it, or we can define it in many ways. But the most basic way that we defined it was that we take the ratio of all the benefits. Okay. And so in this form, I'm computing the present worth of all the benefits. So I'm converting all of the positive cash flow basically into a present worth. Okay. And we're going to put that in the numerator. And then in the denominator, we're going to have the present worth of all the costs. Okay. And then depending on if this ratio is greater than 1. Right, actually, let me go ahead and do this. Right. So if it's greater than 1, right? If it's greater than 1, obviously, then the benefits are going to outweigh the costs. And so, this is going to be usually a good investment. Okay. in other words, it's a good option, okay? But if it's less than 1, this is usually a bad idea. Okay. Okay. Right, and so it's relatively simple to interpret, right? And so if you have a ratio that's greater than 1, that means your benefits are outweighing your costs. But if your ratio is less than 1, that means your costs are outweighing your benefits, and that's usually not something that you want to do unless you're into unless you're into losing money. But I think most people are not into that stuff. Okay. And then we talked a little bit about how we can use this ratio to make decisions between economic alternatives. Okay. And so we had to do something similar, as when we did rate of return, where we had to do what's called the incremental analysis. Okay. Okay. Remember, the whole idea with incremental analysis is that you take the difference of the higher cost option, you take all the benefits from the higher cost option, and you subtract the benefits from the lower cost option. Right? And then same thing for the cost as well. Okay. And so you basically find the increment between them, and then you compute the ratio based on that, right? So remember, we did this for rate of return analysis, and so we have to do the same thing for this benefit cost ratio as well. Okay. All right, and so I think where we left off was we did an example that showed how to do this incremental analysis. Okay. And so what I want to start with today is how we can add some variations to this definition for certain kinds of projects. Okay. Because for certain kinds of projects, that a lot of engineers actually undertake, the goal was actually not to make profit. Okay. Okay. And so the prime example of this would be any kind of public works project, right? And so if you work for, you do a government project, usually those are not profitable, or at least they're not supposed to be generally. Okay. And so doing things like servicing the roads, right, or improving or working on the infrastructure for a bridge, right, or even building a new bridge, right, or building maybe a pipeline for the city, right. And so these things explicitly aren't going to earn any money, but they do have a huge benefit to the public, right. And so you resurface the roads, then you're going to reduce the amount of car accidents. You're going to improve people's commute times, and so that adds value to the community. It adds value to the to the public good. Okay. And so in these situations where you're not explicitly earning any revenue, then if you compute the benefit cost ratio, it's going to look awful, because then you're going to get a benefit cost ratio of 0, basically, because you have 0 benefits but a ton of costs. And so in these situations where you don't really have any benefits, you can modify the benefit cost ratio to kind of reflect this. Okay. And so in these situations, you're going to start thinking about, how do we quantify the public good, or how do we quantify, how much, how much benefits are we giving to the public, and then we're going to compare that to the cost of undertaking that project. Okay. And so on the next page, I'll show you kind of one way or a couple of ways that you can kind of modify this ratio instead of just having it just strictly be benefits over costs. How we can modify this ratio to account for these kinds of projects. Okay. All right. Any questions on this so far? Okay. All right. So let's look at two ways that we can modify this ratio. Okay. All right, and so one way that we can modify is that we can put in the numerator, we can put any kinds of effects to the public. Right. Right, and so this is both good things and could be bad things too, right? And so if you think about, when the roads are serviced, right, or when they're doing construction on like the 57 freeway or the 91 freeway, and they're doing that in the middle of traffic times, then that's going to cause a big disruption in traffic, and so that can be a negative consequence as well. Okay, and so in the numerator here we can put both benefits, ultimate benefits, and maybe some short-term consequences to the public. Okay. Right, and then in the denominator, we can put down the financial costs to either the sponsor or the government or whatever agency is paying for this for this work. Okay. All right. And so let's do an example. Let's do an example which shows this this in action. Okay. And so this is kind of an example analysis that might be done for maybe a city department that's looking to improve the roads. Okay. All right. And so let's say that a certain city wants to improve traffic flow by adding more lanes on the road. Okay. Okay. And specifically, they're looking to add more turn lanes to an intersection. All right. And so, there are two options that are being considered. And so the city can either make more right turn lanes, okay, or they can make more left turn lanes. Okay. Right. And so they can't do both, because there's only a limited amount of space on the road at the intersection. Okay. And so they have to pick one or the other one. Okay. All right. And so after after tabulating all the costs and all the disruptions to the public, then we have the following numbers. Okay. All right, so let's talk initial costs first. And so for the right turn lanes, this is going to cost the city $8.9 million. Okay. And then for the left turn lanes, this is going to cost $11.9 million. Okay. All right. And so that's the initial cost. And now we have the annual maintenance. And so the maintenance for the right turn lanes is going to be $150,000 a year. Okay. All right, and so for the left turn lanes, it's going to cost $225,000 per year. Okay. All right. And so the next thing we're going to quantify here is the initial disruption to the public, right? Because anytime you're going to add more lanes to a road, that's going to cause some construction that's going to occur, and that's going to cause some traffic. And so overall, it's going to be a net disturbance to the public. Okay. And so based on, the amount of traffic and the amount of increased commute time for people, which is going to increase, gas costs, which is going to increase, it's going to reduce productivity in the city. And so, due to all these factors, the city has determined basically a money value for, how much disruption this is going to cost the city. Okay. And so for the right turn lanes, this is going to be an initial disruption to the public costing about $900,000. Okay. Okay. Whereas for the left turn lanes, it's going to cause an initial disruption of 2.1 million. Right. And again, that's a combination of all of the different effects that road construction has, right? So you'd be surprised that, anytime that there's any kind of construction on the road, that even though for individual people it might only add a few minutes to their commute, but overall, you think about everyone that lives in a certain area that passes through a road, that's going to have a ripple effect on a lot of different aspects of their lives, okay? Especially initially when when people don't know that there's a certain construction there. Okay. But then after the construction's done, this is going to add some benefits to the public, right? And so there's more lanes on the road. It means people get to their get to their destinations faster. There's generally less accidents, right? And so it's just a better experience overall, right? And so they've quantified this too. And so for right turn lanes, it's going to add a benefit of $1.6 million per year. Okay. And then for the left turn lanes, it's going to give benefits of $2.2 million per year. Okay. All right. And so if we basically assume an interest rate of 10%, okay, and the time period that we're looking at is 15 years for both options. Okay. Right. We're going to use a incremental benefit cost ratio to determine which one is the better option. Okay. All right. And so any questions on the setup for this example? Okay. All right. So actually, before we do the incremental benefit cost, let's do the individual benefit cost ratio for each of these options, just to make sure that they're actually, they're doing more good than bad. Okay. Okay. All right. And so for this one, remember, servicing the roads is not something that the city's going to make money off of. And so they're not going to charge the citizens for it. And we're going to assume that they're not going to raise any taxes to do this. Right. And so, everything that's going to be quantified here are in terms of, in terms of the effects to the public over the cost to the government. Okay. All right, so let's compute the ratio for the right turns first. Okay. And so the ratios are going to be, the ratio is going to be all the benefits to the public, okay? And so the benefits to the public are going to be the last two rows here. Right? And so this is going to be row 3 and row 4. Right? So even though one of these is negative and the other one's positive, both of these have an effect on the public. Okay, and so we're going to stick these on the same side of the ratio, right? And so we're going to put this in the numerator up here, right? Because they both affect the public. Right? All right, and so for this one we have a first our initial disruption of $900,000, and so we have a minus 900,000 plus 1.6 million. Okay. And then since this 1.6 million is an annual benefit, we need to convert this back to a present worth. And so we need a P over A factor. Okay. This is going to be for 10% and 15 years. Okay. Right. And then in the denominator, we're going to put in all of the costs to the government. Okay. And the cost to the government will be given by the first two lines, right? And so the government initially is going to pay out the initial cost, right? And then each year they have to pay to service these new lanes, right? And so that's going to be paying for the work of the construction workers and also for the materials if they need to touch anything. Okay. And so for the right turn lanes, we have an initial cost of 8.9 million. Okay. And so this is going to be 8.9 million. Okay. Plus the maintenance cost, which is 150,000. Okay. P over A, 10% and 15. Okay. Okay. And so we do, we do all these calculations. We fill out the ratios or the conversion factors from the compound interest table, and then we get a ratio of 1.1 to 2. Okay. All right. And so you can see from this ratio here that at least doing right turn lanes is providing more benefits than cost, which is a good thing, right? And so that means that right turn lanes is a valid option, right? And so we can actually consider it because it's actually doing more good than bad, right? All right, so let's do the same thing for left turn lanes. Right, and so we're going to use the same logic as up there, and so I'm going to kind of do this a little bit quickly. Okay, and so for left turn lanes, we had an initial disruption to the public of worth 2.1 million, and so we have a minus 2.1 million up here. Okay, plus the benefits, and so the benefits are 2.2 million per year. Okay, and this is P over A, 10% and 15 years. And in the denominator, we have all the costs to the government. And so this is going to be the initial cost of 11.9 million. Okay. Plus the annual maintenance, which is 225,000. Okay. This is P over A, 10% and 15. Okay. All right, question. So is there a reason why the initial costs and maintenance are positive? Yeah, no, it's a good question. And so, traditionally, we you want to make it so that, on the numerator of so traditionally, for benefit cost ratio, the numerator is the present worth of all the benefits and the denominator is the present worth of all the costs. And so usually you try to make both of these a positive number so that you get a ratio, above 0. And so even though, in the denominator here, we have costs, right? So we have initial costs and maintenance. We want our ratio to be a positive number. And so that's why we make them positive. Yeah. Yeah, it's a little bit confusing because in the numerator here, we can see we have a negative number. But that's a unique effect because that's, because we're taking that's a consequence to the public, right? And so, even though this change right here, might seem straightforward at first, it can be, I want you guys to kind of read this carefully because, benefits and consequences to the public, both of those are kind of clubbed together in the same place. And so consequences are going to be negative in the numerator, whereas benefits to the public are going to be positive on the numerator. Okay. And so, when you're doing a problem like this and you kind of write out all the costs and the benefits, it really helps if you kind of label your table kind of exactly as I did right here, right? And so I can use colors, but if you don't have colors available to you, you can kind of box things a different way. And so you should mark, which cash flows here affect the public, and that'll tell you whether it's on the numerator. And then you should mark which costs here should be in the denominator. Okay, and then that kind of helps you kind of keep things organized. Yeah. All right. And so computing the ratio for the left turn lanes gives us a ratio of 1.212. Okay. Okay. So both these options are above 1. Okay. And so that means both options here are worthy investments, and so they're both good to do. But we can't conclude yet which one is better yet, because in order to do that, we have to do incremental analysis. Okay. Okay. Because remember the assumption that we always make with these problems, that we have a fixed amount of budget, and so the fixed amount of initial budget that we have is 11.9 million. Okay, and so the question that we want to answer now is that is it good? Is it going to be good for the city to invest in the right turn lanes and then put the rest of the 3 million into something else, or is it good to put everything into the left turn lanes because of how much benefit that's going to generate for the public? Okay, and so in order to properly answer that question, we have to do the incremental analysis, in order to find that ratio. Okay. Okay. Any questions on this before we start with the incremental analysis?
Professor, can you explain why the sign change for the denominator happened again?
Yeah, so in the denominator, that's where we typically put all of the costs. And so we want our ratio in the end to be a positive number. And so if we had the denominator here be negative, then we're going to have a negative ratio, right? And so usually ratios are positive numbers, just by the way that we interpret ratios. And so just for that reason, we put the costs as positive numbers on the denominator, just so that the ratio that we get is positive.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Okay, and so let's go ahead and do the incremental analysis. Okay. And so we're going to do two numbers here, right? And so we're going to do the incremental numerator and the incremental denominator of our ratio. All right, and so let's go ahead and compute the increment on the effects to the public. Okay, and so we're going to take the higher cost option, which in this case is the left turn lanes. Okay, and we're going to subtract the effect on the public for the right turn lanes, because that's the lower cost option. Okay, and so let's go ahead and quantify this for the for the effect on the public, right? Okay, and so let's do the left turn lanes first. Okay, and so for the left turn lanes, we had an initial disruption of $2.1 million. Okay, okay, and then we had our benefit after that of 2.2 million. It's going to be P over A, 10%, and 15. Okay, because that 2.2 million is an annual benefit, which is going to happen every year. Okay. Okay. Okay, and then we're going to subtract the same effects for the right turn lane. Okay. Okay. And so that's a negative 900,000 because that's the initial disruption for the right turn lanes. Okay. And then we're going to add the 1.6 million. Okay, which is the annual benefit to the public. And so that's P over A, 10%, and 15. Okay. All right. And so we compute all those numbers, and then what we get is a net effect on the public as $3.364 million. Okay. All right, and so the same thing we're going to do for the government costs, okay? All right, and so we're going to take the difference between the initial cost between the left turn lanes and the right turn lanes, okay? And so for the left turn lanes, the cost is 11.9 million. Okay, that's the initial cost. And then we're going to add the annual maintenance, which is $225,000. Okay. Since this is a uniform series, we need to convert this to a present worth, and so this is going to be P over A, 10%, and 15. Okay. Right, and then we're going to subtract the cost from the right turn lanes. Okay, and so the right turn lanes had an initial cost of 8.9 million. Okay. And they had an annual maintenance of 150,000. Okay, P over A, 10%, 15. Right. And so we perform all that math. We plug in the compound interest table, and we get 3.57 million. Okay. All right. All right. So now that we found the incremental benefits to the or incremental effects to the public and the incremental cost of the government, we can now take the ratio between them, right? And so the ratio is going to be our first number, which is $3.364 million, okay, divided by $3 million and 570,000. Okay. And so we punch this into a calculator. What we get is a ratio of 0.942. Okay. And so we can see from this that the ratio that we get is less than 1. Okay. And so that tells us that the better option to do is going to be to go with the cheaper one. Okay. And the cheaper option in this case was to build right turn lanes. Okay. And so in this case, the better economic option would be to go with the cheaper option, build the right turn lanes. Okay. And then with that extra $3 million that you have on hand now, go invest that in something else that's going to benefit the public. Okay. Right. And so even though individually the left turn lanes had a higher benefit cost ratio, when you compare these two options against each other, it's better to go with the cheaper option here and then use the rest of the money for something else. Okay. Right. Any questions on this example here? Okay. All right, and so that's benefit cost ratio. Okay, and so it's a it's a little bit of a combination of present worth analysis, but also rate of return analysis too. And so it's kind of a nice kind of combination between those ones. Okay. All right, and so now that we're done with our economic analysis techniques, we're ready to start talking about a little bit more complexity, right? All right, question. So do we only do incremental when individually both are greater than 1? And so, yeah, so the answer to that is, you can do incremental analysis. A lot of times you don't even have to check the individual benefit cost ratio or the individual rate of return. So you can just skip straight to the incremental one. And so, you can just do the incremental one, and that'll tell you whether you should go for one option or the other one. Yeah. Yep. Okay. And so for the next few weeks, kind of as we finish out this big unit on economics, and so I'd say there's three and a half more big topics that I want to cover. Before we start getting into engineering ethics. Okay. And these three big topics, they all are kind of building on top of what we already know. And I would say, these three topics are kind of more practical things that you would see more likely in the real world. Okay. And the first of which is taxes, which is what every citizen of this country has to pay. Okay. And this subject of taxes goes hand in hand with another concept called depreciation, which is what we're going to cover too. Okay, so this whole set of lecture notes is called taxes and depreciation. All right. And so, to kind of start us off, I want to start with a quote from a very wise man, right? And so, this wise man once said that there are only two inevitables in life, right? And so the first inevitable is death, right? Not to sound morbid, but at least now with the way that science and aging works, everyone's going to die at some point. Okay. And the other inevitable is taxes, right? And so whenever you have a system of government, the government has to be funded somehow, and the way that it's funded is through taxes. Okay. But unfortunately, for this wise man, so if you're not aware what this quote is from Ben Franklin, right? And so unfortunately for Ben Franklin, he was kind of not old enough to know that there's actually a third inevitable that we just actually found out in the last few years, right? And that inevitable is Thanos, right? Which is understandable because the Marvel Cinematic Universe didn't exist back in his day, but now we know that Thanos is also inevitable. Right? Okay, all kidding aside, Thanos isn't inevitable yet. I don't think I've been snapped out of existence yet, but let's talk about taxes. Okay, all right. And in particular, the type of taxes that I want to talk about are income taxes. Okay. And so income taxes are the taxes that you pay based on any money that you earn. And so this is true for both individuals and both for companies as well. Okay, and so taxes are something that engineering companies are always thinking about because basically the way income taxes work is that you take a percentage of the amount of money that you make, and then that percentage goes to the government. Okay. And so for those of you that are working now, you're probably familiar with this, right? You get your paycheck and it's less than what your hourly rate was because the government took a slice of it, right? And so it's the same for me, the same for everyone else, right? And so it's the same for companies as well. Okay. And so ideally, companies don't like to do this, right? So and individuals don't like to do this either, right? And so there's what companies will want to do is they want to reduce the amount of taxes that they pay as much as possible. Okay. Right. And the way that companies do this is that they basically reduce the amount of what's called taxable income. Okay. Right. And taxable income is basically just, the amount of income that they made that's subject to taxes. Okay. And so they can reduce this amount and therefore pay less taxes by doing what's called either deductions or expenses. Okay. Okay. And so what the US tax law says is that any money that you put towards actually running your business, and so that's ordinary, what we call ordinary or necessary expenditures. So any money that you spend on like raw materials, any money that you spend paying people, okay, any money that you spend buying equipment, okay, you can deduct those from your expenses, or you can deduct them from your taxable income, and therefore pay less taxes overall. Okay. And so that's basically going to be the subject of the next, 2 lectures, maybe 2.5 lectures, as we talk about, how companies typically do this. Okay. Okay. Any questions on this so far? Reducing your pay? No, it doesn't reduce. Oh, well, yeah, technically it reduces your amount of pay, right? And so anytime you get some kind of paycheck that's taxed, government is always going to take a slice of it. Mm-hmm. But even as individuals, there's things that you can do to kind of reduce the amount of taxes that you pay as well. And so if you're familiar with the concept of a 401k account, right? And so with 401k, the way that works is that each offshore accounts, that's only for Beth Bezos and his friends. If you're familiar with the 401k, basically, let's say that you get paid every month a certain amount, and then what you can do is you can take a slice of that. So take a certain amount of money from your paycheck, and then stash that away into a very long-term savings account. Okay, and then that money that you put away in the 401k, that doesn't get taxed yet. So it'll get taxed later, but not now. Okay, and then the amount of taxes that you pay now is only based on whatever's left after you subtract from the 401k. Yeah. And so this subject here actually, I think, has a lot of practical applications, because it's something that everyone has to deal with at some point in their life. Yeah. Oh yes, Roth. Yes, Roth is a great option. But for Roths, you pay tax. That's already on your Roths are on money that you've already paid taxes on, and so you've kind of already paid the taxes for that. But Roth is another great option that you guys should look into as well. Okay, and so let me go ahead and write a formula for taxable income, just because we've kind of just been talking about it in words, but let's kind of put a formula to it. Okay. All right, and so your taxable income, okay, your taxable income is a formula of and this is mostly for companies, and so for individuals, typically you won't have all of these things. Okay. But the first ingredient here is your gross income. Okay. Right. And so that's like the gross amount of money that you make for a certain pay period, right? And so if you make, let's say, a yearly salary, and then you and then you get paid every month. Your gross income per month would just be your, your salary that's stated on your employment contract divided by 12, right? And so that's the amount of money that you make before taxes. Okay. All right. And so what companies can do is that they can subtract something called ordinary or necessary expenditures. Okay. All right, and so these are things like the cost of labor, the cost of materials, the cost of equipment that may last, less than 1 year. Okay, and so these are all costs that you had to pay in order to run your business. Okay, and then the last thing, and then the third thing that you can subtract from your taxable income are what's known as depreciation charges. Okay. Okay, so let me go ahead and define each of these each of the terms here, just so that we kind of know, right? And so let's start with gross income. Okay, and this is within the context of a company, and so this is more for that. Okay, and so gross income is the total amount of money made by the company. Okay, and so however much the company made in sales, either selling a product or selling a service, right? And so that number is their gross income. Yeah. All right, question. So what's considered a tax write-off? So these are what's considered tax write-offs here. And so, I think I use the terms here deducting or expensing, but writing off from your taxes, it's kind of another synonym for this. Yeah. And so any ordinary or necessary expenditures or depreciation charges, these count as tax write-offs. Yeah. All right. And so ordinary or necessary expenditures. And so these are, any costs that are associated with running the company that are needed. Okay. And so some examples of these costs would be like labor. Okay. Right. And so paying your employees, paying your staff. Okay. And so, from a company's perspective, they shouldn't have to pay taxes on that money because the employees themselves are going to pay taxes on it anyway. And so, it's not fair to kind of pay taxes on both. And so that's why, you can deduct that from the taxable income from your company. Next is materials. Okay. And so for materials that can be, either the wood or the metal or, whatever that your company needs to either create a product or to do their service. Okay. Right, and then the other thing that fits into this category of ordinary expenditures is any kind of equipment that lasts less than 1 year. And so this is kind of like short-term equipment that you kind of use and you kind of use it up by the year. Okay, and that distinction is really clear because for any other equipment that's kind of a longer-term purchase, that your company is going to use for many years, that gets clumped together in the next category, which is depreciation. And so depreciation, this is the cost of any large equipment that lasts for greater than 1 year. And so if you use like if your company has to purchase like a new truck or a new automobile, right? Or maybe they have to purchase a new like forklift or something like that, right? And so these are machineries that, first of all, cost a lot of money, and your company plans to use them over many years. And so you don't, the way those work is that you don't deduct or you don't write off everything, the entire cost of that up front. You kind of spread the cost of that over several years. Okay. And that's the whole concept of depreciation that we'll, that we'll go over, probably starting next lecture. Okay. And so, we are going to do an example of this pretty soon, because I think it's, I think with this equation here and with these definitions, I think it'll help to kind of, do an example. But this is kind of the basics of how you compute your taxable income. Okay. All right. Any questions on this? Okay. All right. And so once you compute your taxable income, then you can use this to compute the taxes that you pay. Okay. Okay. And so the taxes that you pay is simply just the product of your taxable income and then you're going to multiply that by the tax rate. Okay. And the tax rate is usually some fraction that's less than 1. Right. And so for these lecture notes, I wrote these lecture notes a few years ago, and I think I used a textbook that was even older than that. And so the tax rate is something that's kind of changing on a fairly regular basis. But just for the sake of simplicity and just for the sake of consistency with these lecture notes, I'm going to assume that the federal tax rate is 21%, and that's going to be consistent all throughout. Okay. Okay. And that's going to be basically the same all throughout. And so of course, at least for individuals, the amount of taxes that you pay, you get placed in a certain bracket based on how much money that you make, and so that number changes. But just for simplicity in these calculations, so I'm just going to assume 21%. But you can redo any of the calculations or any of the examples that we do with different tax rates based on what bracket that you're in, or what designation your company belongs to. Yeah. But for now, I'm just going to assume 21%. Okay. Okay. All right. And so before we actually let's just do a simple example just to kind of show all of this in action. All right. And so let's say that you're in charge of the books, you're in charge of the accounting for your engineering company, okay? And you're tracking and you've seen basically the amount of cash flows for a 3-year period. Okay. All right, and so then you're tracking basically the following 4 numbers, right? And so the 4 numbers that you're tracking are the gross income, okay, right? And you're going to do it for 3 years. Right, and so the gross income for year 1, we'll say that this is $9,000. Okay. For year 2, the gross income was $9,500. Okay. And then for year 3, we have a gross income of $8,500. Okay. All right. Next, you're also tracking the amount that you're spending on labor. Okay. And so for the first year, you spent $2,500 on labor. Okay. Year 2, you spent $3,000, and year 3, you spent $3,500. Okay. That's a really small amount to spend on labor, and so let's just assume that these numbers are multiplied by 1,000 or something like that, right? And so the actual amount of money that you spending on labor is 2,500 times 1,000, and so just for simplicity's sake, we kind of chopped off 3 zeros, but but just for the sake of computing taxes, I think these smaller numbers will make it a little bit easier. Okay. Next, you have the material cost, right? And so this is the amount of money that your company has spent on materials each year. Okay. And so for year 1, your company spent $500 on materials. Okay. Year 2, the company spent $750, and in year 3, you spent $400. Okay. All right, and finally, the last cash flow that you've been tracking is the amount of maintenance costs that your company's paying each year. Okay, and let's just assume that it's $350 per year. Okay. And so what we're going to do is that let's assume that we have a tax rate of 21%. And so assuming we have a 21% tax rate, let's compute the amount of taxes that the company paid each year. Okay. All right, any questions on the problem setup? Okay. All right, and so first thing we're going to do is that each year we're going to compute the taxable income, right? Because what we're given here is the gross income, or the total amount of money the company's made, but we're not going to get taxed on all of it, right? Because we have all of these expenses that we can write off from our taxes or deduct them from our taxes. Right, and so the first thing we're going to compute is the taxable incomes from each year. Okay. All right, and so all the costs that we have here, and so we have labor, we have materials, and we have maintenance. All of these are considered as ordinary and necessary expenditures, right? Because this is money that your company had to pay in order for it to run its business. Okay. All right. All right, and so in year 1, we had a gross income of $9,000. Okay. Then we're going to subtract the labor costs, right? And so we're going to subtract $2,500. Okay. Then we're going to subtract the 500, and then we're going to subtract the 250. Okay, or 350. I'm sorry, for the maintenance. Okay. Right, and then remember, the reason we're subtracting these is they're all ordinary expenditures. Okay, and so we simply just perform the subtraction, and we get 5,650. Okay. All right, and so in year 1, we're only going to get taxed on $5,650. Okay, and so all the money that we spent on our ordinary expenditures, we're not going to get taxed on that stuff. All right, year 2. And so year 2, we had a gross income of $9,500. Okay. Then we had a labor cost of $3,000. Our material cost was $750. And our maintenance cost was $350. Okay. And so we compute that, and then we get a taxable income of $5,400. right? And so in year 3, we had a gross income of $8,500. Okay, our labor cost was $3,500. Our material cost was $400, and then our maintenance cost was $350. Okay, and so our taxable income for that year is $4,250. Okay. All right. And so, after doing our deductions or after doing our write-offs, we can see that, we're only going to get taxed on this amount of money versus the gross income that we had on the previous page. Okay. All right. Any questions on how we computed these? Okay. All right. And so now that we have our taxable income, we can then compute our taxes paid. Okay. And so our taxes paid is simply just going to be the product of our taxable income and our tax rate. Okay. All right. And so in year 1, our taxable income is $5,650. Okay. And our tax rate is 21%. Okay. So we're just going to take 21% of this. And so the amount of taxes that we pay in year 1 is $1,186.50. All right, and so in year 2, our taxable income was $5,400. Okay, we're going to multiply this by 0.21. Okay, it's going to be $1,134.00. Okay. Okay. All right, and so in year 3, our taxable income was only $4,250. Okay, we multiply this by 0.21, and we get $892.50. Okay. Right, and so with this simple example here, you kind of see kind of the whole path right here, right? And so we go from basically, your gross income, you subtract away all of the necessary expenditures that you needed to run your business, and then you arrive at a final number for your taxable income, and then you just multiply that by the tax rate, and that gives you the amount of taxes that you paid. Okay. All right. Any questions on this? Sure. Yeah. So the question is, can I define gross income one more time? Yeah. So gross income is just the total amount of money that the company made for that year. Yeah. And so through selling its product and through selling its services, that's the amount of money that it made. And so one analogy or one comparison that you can make is that typically for an individual, their gross income or their gross salary is usually the number that they say on your contract. And so if they tell you that you're making $65,000 a year, that's your gross income. Yeah. So that's basically the amount of money before taxes. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And so that's just a simple tax example. Okay. But what's missing from this example here is any large purchases, right? And so all of the deductions that we made or all the write-offs, those are for all I would consider short-term things. And so buying materials that you're going to use up within the year, paying for labor, labor is paid on a yearly basis, right? And then maintenance, you pay that kind of year by year too. Okay. And so what wasn't accounted for here was that what if the company bought a large piece of equipment, okay, that they're going to use for several years, right? And so those pieces of equipment that and they kind of a more general term for I would call them large capital purchases. Those kind of follow a different set of rules. Okay. Because the thing with most large capital purchases, so things like you purchase like an automobile or you purchase an airplane or something like that. Okay? You don't just use it up in 1 year, right? And so the thing with these kinds of large purchases is that their value kind of decreases slowly over time. Okay. Okay. All right, and so think about purchasing a car, right? And so if you purchase a car, I know the value of the car kind of drops immediately as soon as you drive it off the lot. But let's say that you buy a new car, right? And so 1 year later, that car is still going to be worth something, right? And so you can still sell it at a fair market price. It's not going to be as much as what you bought it for initially, but it still has some value, right? And so what you can say is that if you compare the point from when you bought the car to 1 year later, then the value of the car decreased by a certain amount. Okay. Okay. And so let's say that you bought a car and it was worth $21,000. Okay. Okay. And then 1 year later, let's say that the car dropped in value to about 17,500. Okay. Okay. What we can say is that in that 1 year, you've spent the difference on cost of these two, right? And so if we subtract these two numbers, what you shall get is what is this, 30,500. Okay. Okay. What you can say is that over that 1 year, the value of the car dropped by that 3,500. Okay. And so, so now let's say that you're using this car as a means to do business, right? And so let's say that you have kind of a, let's say that you drive for Uber, right? I think that's a very easy example to think about, right? And so over that year of driving Uber, the car that you purchased to drive with Uber has decreased in value by 3,500. Okay. And so, that's basically, you can now consider this 3,500 as a ordinary expenditure for conducting your business. Okay. And so then you can then because this $3,500 is basically an expense that you're paying out to run your business, you can then write this off, or you can deduct them from your taxes. Okay. All right, question. So when I wrote value not used up in 1 year, so what I mean by that is that basically the value of this capital purchase didn't go down to zero in 1 year. Yeah. Yeah, and so it would be a different story if you bought this car and then a year later it was worthless. And so if that was like $0, then you would use up the entire $21,000 in 1 year. Yeah. Mhm. All right. Oops. Okay. Right, and so this is an important distinction, because I think, when when people are first kind of doing their tax calculations, they do kind of a very large purchase like this, and then what they want to do immediately is they want to take this full $21,000, right, the full cost of your capital purchase up front, and they wanted to deduct this from their taxes. Okay. Okay. Right. Because in a lot of cases, that wouldn't be fair, right? And so then what people can do then is or what companies can do is that they can, buy large pieces of equipment, okay, deduct that from their taxes for 1 year, and then sell that equipment off for, still a decent value, and then they kind of evade doing a lot of or paying a lot of taxes. Okay. That's not to say that other companies nowadays are not doing other shady stuff to not pay taxes, but that's a discussion for another day, another class. We're not going to get into that in this class, but this is one way in the tax law that that people can that they can avoid people paying or deducting large purchases from their taxable income upfront. Okay. And so this idea that, the fact that large capital purchases only decrease in value a small amount each year, this is the whole idea behind depreciation. Okay. Right. And so what we're going to do over the next week is we're going to see how to account for these depreciation effects into our tax calculations. Okay. Okay. Any questions on this so far? Okay. So let me go ahead and draw kind of a visual just to kind of show you, okay, kind of what's going on with depreciation. All right, and so on the x-axis here, let's say that we have time. Okay, and time could be measured in let's just say years. Okay. Okay. And on the y-axis here, I'm going to define what's something called a book value. Okay. And so the book value is just nothing more than the value of the current value of a large capital purchase. Okay. Okay. All right, and so generally, with depreciation, what's going to happen is that, right when you buy it, let's say that, this point right here is where you buy. Okay, the book value of that piece of equipment is the same value of what you bought it for, right? And so, the idea with depreciation is that this value is going to slowly decrease over time, like this, right? And so if you measure the value a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 4 years, okay? And so obviously it's going down, right? And so, as you use the machine more and more, the machine is not going to have as much value as it did when you first purchased it, but, it still has a good chunk of value, right? Okay. Okay, and so let's say this is after year 1, after year 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. Okay. And then the amount that you can actually deduct from your taxes is just the difference in between these two. All right, and so what we're going to do on Thursday is that we're gonna learn how to actually compute depreciation for certain purchases. Okay, and we'll see that there are several ways to do that, and then we'll see how that factors into our tax calculations. Okay. All right. Any final questions on this before we wrap up for today?
It says buy on the left, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm. All right, questions though. Is Kelly Blue Book the only one used or one of the few book values tools used? Yeah, it's one of a few. And so it is one of the more reputable ones I know that's out there. But there's other ways to do it. And actually, every big company will have their own accounting department that kind of values their own assets in a way too. And so every company does this just because it's in their own best interest to kind of have their own system for determining value and not rely on an outside source. Yeah. Mhm. All right, and so that's all we have time for today. And so thank you guys for tuning in. And so I will have your midterms graded by Thursday, and so we'll talk about it then, right? And so enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and I'll see you guys on Thursday.
Professor,
Yep. Mhm.
is it always linearly losing value?
That's a great question. And so in the simplest case of depreciation, we'll do a linear decrease like this, but there's other schemes too. And so there's actually 4 different schemes that we'll talk about on how the value can decrease with time.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Mhm.
Does it also depend on how the economy is doing?
A little bit, yeah. And so another way you can interpret these book values is you can interpret them as like the salvage value for the piece of machinery, right? And so if you were to sell that machinery like at the end of year 1, you can basically assume that you would get this price for it right here. And so depending on how the market's doing and the supply and demand for these kinds of things, and that can raise from lower this as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Mhm.
And there's also an opposite effect, like for classic cars, in a way.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And so they're especially nowadays too, because it's like you mentioned classic cards, but I have friends that are really into like really rare like Pokemon trading cards. And so that's a really interesting market because that's the value for those kind of actually goes up with time. And so
Yeah.
those are a unique case. And so we'll talk about that a little bit. Maybe not Thursday, but maybe next Tuesday. I do have a little bit. Actually, yeah, maybe next Thursday we'll talk about it too. Yeah, and so for those types of purchases, those are what's known as capital gains. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Mhm. Right. Any more questions before we close up the Zoom room? Okay. All right. So I'll see you guys on Thursday.